There is a chamber at the bottom of the Baltic Sea that no human being has ever entered. Not because they didn't try, because something stopped them. Dennis Asberg knows what's down there.
I get goosebumps all over my body. I have never ever seen anything like that.
For years, he refused to talk about it, and once you hear what his team ran into 300 feet below the surface, you'll understand the silence.
I said to all the crew members that be quiet about this. Don't say anything till we know what it is.
It starts with a shape, massive, circular, sitting alone in the dark on the seafloor, too perfect, too deliberate to be stone. Trail it backward, and the seabed tells a story, a gouge nearly 1,000 feet long, carved into the mud, like something colossal was dragged across the ocean floor and then simply stopped. Then, the equipment turned on them. Float directly above it, and satellite phones die. Cameras cut out. Diving gear ices over, and from somewhere inside the object pulses a 5 Hz signal, the signature of a military submarine. On top, Asberg says, there's a sealed hatch. Whatever is inside it is still inside it. What comes next might change how you see the ocean and history forever. The day the sonar showed something impossible, June 19, 2011, was supposed to be an ordinary day at sea. Dennis Åsberg and Peter Lindberg took their team out onto the Baltic with one simple goal: find old shipwrecks. Specifically the kind that sank centuries ago, still holding cases of vintage wine, forgotten cargo, pieces of history worth pulling up from the dark. There was nothing unusual on the schedule. No legend they were chasing, no anomaly they were hunting, just another day of work on a sea they thought they knew. And the Baltic is the perfect place to hunt for those wrecks. The water here is strange, barely any salt, brutally cold, almost no wood-eating organisms to rot a hull away, which means ships that went down 400 or 500 years ago can still be sitting on the seabed in near-perfect condition. Asberg's team had been doing this for years. They knew these waters. That morning, the boat drifted slowly, the team's eyes fixed on the sonar screen, everything routine. Then a shape started bleeding into the image. At first, nobody could tell what they were looking at, but as the sonar sharpened the picture, the room went silent. About 300 feet down, resting on the seabed, was a massive circular structure so large it looked like a small aircraft lying on the bottom of the sea. And it was the shape that stopped them cold. Straight lines, hard corners, and trailing out behind it, a long scar dragged across the ocean floor. For a few seconds, nobody said a word. Asberg just stared at the screen. He'd later admit that in that exact moment, he felt they'd found something the world might not be ready to understand. The first instinct was the rational one: the sonar must be glitching. Strange shapes show up under the sea all the time. But something in Asberg's gut told him this was different, and he ordered the boat to swing back around for another pass. Minutes later, the same shape rose onto the screen again. Exactly the same. The same circle, the same edges, the same long mark behind it. Now every eye in the room was locked on it. The thing was roughly 60 meters wide, about the size of a large passenger jet. But it was never the size that scared them. It was the geometry. How does a natural rock, lying alone at the bottom of the ocean, come out that round, that even? And behind it stretched that flat mark, nearly 1,000 feet long, as if something enormously heavy had slid across the seabed and then just stopped. Asberg said it looked like a runway. The trail behind it was so clean, it was as though a machine had carved a path through the mud. Then they looked harder at the edges, and it got worse. In places, there were clean 90-degree angles. Nature doesn't usually do that. Rocks crack and crumble, but perfect corners are rare. On top of the structure there were shapes like steps, level after level of stair like lines, climbing upward. To Asberg, this wasn't a rock. It looked like a construction, and the whole thing sat slightly lifted off the seabed, balanced like a giant mushroom, or a fortress raised up on a pillar. They scanned it again and again, from every angle they could manage. Nothing changed. The same impossible shape every single time. And one question kept circling in Asberg's mind, refusing to leave. If this thing is natural, why is it so perfect? And if it isn't natural, then what in God's name is it? The sonar images were frightening enough, but the real truth was sitting 300 feet down in the dark. A few days later, the team made the only decision left to make. They were going down to see it with their own eyes. The dive into the dead zone below, diving the Baltic, is not for the faint of heart. The water is freezing, heavy, and thick with murk. The deeper you go, the more the light dies, until by about 300 feet it's like stepping into a sealed black room with no walls. That's exactly what the divers found as they sank toward the structure. Their helmet lamps could push the dark back only a few feet. Everywhere else, nothing but cold and blackness. The seabed was so soft that the smallest movement kicked up clouds of silt and turned the water to soup, and as they got closer, an unease crept over them. Some of the divers said afterward that they started losing their sense of direction down there, as if the environment itself had changed around them, the pressure of the water pressing down relentlessly on their heads. Then, out of the dark, it appeared. A huge black surface, half swallowed by the seabed. They moved in slowly and laid their hands on it. This was no ordinary stone. The texture was wrong. Parts of it felt like something that had been heated to extreme temperatures and then cooled. The surface coated in a burnt, scorched layer, the kind of residue metal leaves behind when it burns. And the closer they looked, the stranger it became. The structure wasn't simply resting on the bottom, it was fused into it, embedded, as if it had been part of that seabed from the very beginning. Then they found the section on top, something that looked like a lid, a door, a hatch with step-like shapes ringed around it. One diver said that in that moment, he no longer felt like he was standing on a rock at the bottom of the sea. He felt like he was standing on top of a hidden machine, a sealed chamber. At first, they blamed the depth and the cold for what came next. Equipment acting up underwater isn't unusual. But what happened was not normal. The instant their boat sat directly above the structure, the satellite phones didn't just lose signal, they died. Screens went black. The crew assumed a dead battery and grabbed a second phone. Same thing. A third phone. Same result. Now the unease turned to something sharper. Asberg ordered the boat pulled back, and the moment they drifted about 200 meters off the spot, the phones flickered back to life. Nobody could believe it, so they tested it. They steered back toward the structure, and the second they crossed that invisible line, the phones shut down again. They pulled out, phones on, back in. Dead, they ran it again, and the result never wavered. This wasn't coincidence. It was as if the thing on the seabed had thrown an invisible dead zone around itself, a boundary where electronics simply stopped working the moment you entered it. You could map it. You could feel it coming. And not one person on that boat had any explanation for what could possibly cause it. So they sent professional cameras down for clean footage. At first, the feed was fine, but as the camera descended toward the object, the picture started tearing apart white, snow like static crawling across the screen, until the camera froze solid. They sent a second one. Same death. Even the sonar began to stutter, the image snapping clear and then cutting out, as if something below was actively jamming it. And the part that truly rattled the divers was when their dive computers, the instruments that tell you your depth, your oxygen, your time underwater, started failing. Screens froze. Some shut down entirely. The underwater communication systems dissolved into harsh, distorted noise. By now, Asberg couldn't pretend anymore that this was just a rock. And for the first time, the same thought rose in everyone at once. Is that thing down there somehow still active? The samples that made scientists go quiet, when the equipment kept dying again and again, the team realized there was only one way to settle it. They had to bring a piece of the thing to the surface. If it really was just an ordinary rock, Its fragments would end every argument. So the divers went down, broke off small pieces from the surface, and carried them up. The skeptics moved fast. "It's just basalt," they said, volcanic rock. Easy answer, clean explanation, case closed. Except when the samples actually went under analysis, the easy answer fell apart. Some reports turned up elements like limonite and goethite iron-based oxides, the kind of materials that can be tied to intense heat or metal processes. That was the first crack. Because parts of it didn't read like plain natural stone. They read more like processed material. Even slag, the substance that forms at extreme temperatures alongside metal. Then came the detail that genuinely unsettled people. Across the surface of the structure sat a black, soot-like layer. At first, they assumed sediment, but on closer inspection, it looked like burnt carbon scorch marks. Some compared it to the heat shield of a spacecraft, a surface that had survived punishing temperatures. And here's where the story takes a quieter, colder turn. Some of the experts who saw the reports declined to make their conclusions public. A few researchers quietly stepped back from the project entirely. According to Asberg, the higher the data climbed toward the big institutions, the more the silence spread. So the question shifted. It was no longer just what is down there. It became, if this is all so normal, why won't anyone speak openly about it? The samples hadn't closed the mystery. They'd cracked it wide open, because for the first time the team was holding physical evidence that pointed away from ordinary rock. And then there was the signal. As the investigation deepened, the team learned that an extremely low-frequency pulse had been recorded coming from the area, around 5 Hz. In plain terms, that's an ELF signal, extremely low frequency, and signals that low aren't casual. They're used for very specific jobs. The most well-known one, communicating with military submarines deep underwater, because a frequency that low can punch through water and even through solid earth. Here's the frightening part. You don't generate a signal like that by accident. It normally takes enormous antenna arrays, heavy power supplies. Sprawling infrastructure, even superpowers like the United States, built massive dedicated stations to do it. But around that structure on the Baltic seabed, there's nothing. No power plant, no cables, no machinery of any kind. So where is a 5 Hz signal coming from? For Asberg's team, that was the most disturbing piece of all. A signal that should require a small city's worth of equipment was apparently radiating out of a bare patch of seabed with nothing visible around it. Because if the signal really was bleeding out of that area, it suggested the thing below was somehow active, or at least tied to some kind of energy response. Something powering it, something none of them could see. As word of the anomaly spread, people started spinning their own theories, and the first to catch fire was the Nazi theory. During the Second World War, the Baltic was a hub of German military activity, the site of secret experiments. So the idea took hold. Maybe this massive circle was an old anti-submarine device, a jammer, built to scramble enemy subs and radar. It's a compelling story, until you look closer, because the sediment and geological patterns built up around the structure suggest it has not been sitting there for 70 or 80 years. Many estimates push it to thousands of years old. And no piece of 1940s military hardware can possibly be buried under sediment that's around 14,000 years old. Which forces open a far stranger door. What if this wasn't built by anyone in modern history at all? The sealed chamber nobody has ever entered. Roll the clock back 14,000 years, and the Baltic looked nothing like it does now. Much of it wasn't underwater at all large stretches or dry land. So the question writes itself. If some advanced civilization lived here back then, could this be one of their structures? An ancient temple, an energy center, some kind of technology we don't have a name for. To some, that's exactly what it resembles. The problem, of course, is that engineering like this doesn't fit anywhere on our accepted historical timeline, which only drives the mystery deeper. On one side, a secret Nazi weapon. On the other, a forgotten civilization older than recorded history. Neither is proven. But both point to the same conclusion: whatever is down there may be far more complex than anything we're comfortable believing. The mainstream answer, naturally, was the simplest one. Many geologists called it a glacial erratic, a giant rock picked up, carried, and dropped by the massive ice sheets of the Ice Age, left behind when the glaciers melted. And on the surface, that's clean science. Glaciers absolutely moved enormous rocks across huge distances. So, couldn't that explain this? Maybe. But Asberg and his team pushed back on that theory harder than any other, and their questions are hard to wave off. If it's just a natural rock, then why does it have steps? Glaciers can drag a boulder, sure, but can ice carve even, level, multi-tiered staircases into one? Then there are the 90-degree angles. Yes, rock can fracture into sharp edges, but the clean right angles and straight lines on the Anomaly look far less like nature and far more like design. Then the texture divers described parts of the surface as feeling like concrete, like touching something molded. If it's only a rock, why does it feel like processed material? Some scientists offered basalt as the answer, but that runs into its own wall. This part of the Baltic isn't a volcanic zone. No active volcanoes, no dormant ones. So how did volcanic-type material end up here at all? And then the strangest piece, the carbon crust. Glaciers drag things, they don't burn them. If this surface went through enough heat to form a scorched heat shield-like layer, ice activity alone can't explain it. Add the nearly 985-foot mark trailing behind it. If a glacier simply dropped a rock here, why is there a clean, long, almost runway-like track behind it, as if a heavy object slid across the floor and abruptly halted? Scientists insist it can all be natural. Asberg's reply is more careful. Maybe, but every single detail demands its own separate explanation. And when one structure needs a dozen different convenient excuses to be called natural, doubt only grows. For Asberg, the geology never fully added up. Then, the team looked even closer at the surface, and the story turned genuinely frightening. On the upper part of the structure, they found circular holes. Not random damage, not casual breakage. According to several reports, the holes were almost identical in size, spaced like vents, openings, entry points. Erosion makes ragged, irregular holes. So why were these so round, so deep, so deliberate? And then the divers noticed something else. On one section, it looked as though a piece of the roof had collapsed or broken inward. Beneath it was a deep, swallowing darkness, as if there was empty space inside. A chamber. It was never fully confirmed, but some sonar scans hinted at corridor-like hollows running through the structure. Passages, rooms. This was the moment the Baltic Anomaly stopped being a rock debate for a lot of people. The divers tried to push toward the opening, and the deeper they pressed, the worse it got. Dive computers glitched harder. Visibility all but vanished. The cold bit sharper. Some described the sensation of hitting an invisible wall, a barrier they couldn't see, but somehow felt pressing back against them. And it wasn't only physical now, the fear was getting into their heads. The darkness was so total, the lights couldn't reveal what waited inside. Just emptiness. A locked, lightless void with no answer behind it. Every nerve told them to turn around, and every time they did. For Asberg, this became the most haunting part of all. Because if they could just reach that chamber safely, the answer to the whole mystery might be sitting inside it. But every time they tried to go deeper, something turned them back. The technology failed, the water blinded them, and the mystery slipped back into the dark. To this day, the biggest question remains unanswered. What is actually beneath that collapsed roof? A natural hollow? The inside of an ancient structure? Or something nobody on Earth has ever seen? The sunken history and the silence around it. The Baltic isn't just a cold sea. To a lot of people, it's a drowned vault of history. Those same strange conditions, low salt, brutal cold, almost no biological activity, preserve centuries-old objects in astonishing shape, which is exactly why it's considered one of the largest underwater archaeological vaults on the planet. Asberg and his team have spent years combing it for shipwrecks, sunken treasure, lost relics. It's the same sea that gave up the Mars, a massive 16th century warship found in remarkable condition. But the discoveries clustered around the anomaly pushed some people's thinking somewhere else entirely. Stone like pillars on the seabed, strange formations, in places, patterns that look like submerged roads, zones where the sonar simply behaves wrong. Plenty of people call all of that ordinary geology, but some researchers suspect there are chapters of history buried under the Baltic that we haven't begun to understand. And the key, again, is that 14,000-year-old land. Where there's deep ocean today, there could once have been plateaus, valleys, even human settlements. Which gives birth to a bold idea. If the anomaly and the structures scattered around it date back to that era, could they be the remains of an ancient northern civilization? It sounds outrageous, until you remember history has handed us this kind of shock before. Göbekli Tepe is the obvious example. A discovery that proved humans were building massive, complex structures far earlier than we ever believed possible. So the question lands hard. Is there a forgotten chapter sealed under the Baltic? Did rising seas drown an ancient world? Could the stairs, the corridors, the geometry be what's left of it? And as the team kept inching closer to the truth, the story stopped being purely scientific. It started turning into something heavier, a story of pressure and fear. Some members claimed that the moment they reached the site, the headaches started. Unease, a sense that the air around the place was simply wrong. None of it is proven, but when different people keep reporting the same discomfort, it's hard to ignore. The local fishermen had their own version. They said fish are scarce around certain coordinates, that nets come up empty, that some patches of water have been quietly avoided for generations. Folklore, or is there really something down there shaping the world around it? According to Asberg, the deeper they dug, the more the challenges stopped feeling natural. On several expeditions, they noticed distant military ships sitting on the horizon. Sometimes patrol aircraft drifted unusually close. Impossible to say whether any of it was connected to the anomaly, but when you're already circling a mystery this strange, that kind of company only sharpens the questions. There were even reports of odd radio chatter, activity on frequencies the team never expected to hear. Then came the heaviest obstacle of all, simply keeping the search alive. Asberg has said many times that funding became almost impossible to hold together. The moment a project got tied to the Baltic anomaly, investors started backing away. Permits got delayed. Administrative walls went up. Experts who had been eager at first quietly drifted off, and according to Asberg, some researchers were even informally warned to stay away from it. None of that is easy to confirm independently, but the frustration is real. He poured in his private savings, asked the public for support, planned expedition after expedition, and every time, the money fell short, or the permissions froze, or the equipment failed. Slowly it stopped being a hunt for something hidden under the sea, and became a fight just to reach a truth that got harder to touch at every turn. He doesn't openly cry conspiracy, but you can hear the exhaustion in him, and he's convinced that if a fully independent, properly funded team ever gets enough time down there, the answers might finally surface. After years of silence, ridicule, and expeditions that never quite finished, Dennis Asberg is talking now more openly than he ever has. What he saw, what he felt, the questions he's carried for over a decade, he's putting all of it in front of the world. He doesn't claim to have the answers, but he says one thing without flinching. Calling this an ordinary rock is the easy explanation. It may not be the right one, because even today, when teams approach that location, the reports keep coming back the same. Electronics fail. Cameras die. Phones shut down. Instruments stop responding. And the argument over that 5 Hearts pulse still isn't settled. If all of this is simply natural, then why, after all these years, are there still so many questions no one can answer? If you want revelations like this before anyone else, subscribe to the channel right now and hit the bell, because the next mystery might completely change the way you see the world. So what do you think is really down there? A glacial rock, a lost Nazi weapon, or the ruins of a civilization history forgot? And what's sealed inside that chamber? Drop your theory in the comments, we read them all.